Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing a tutorial on eye primers and whether you need them. That is a question I get asked a lot by yourselves. As a makeup artist, I use a variety of different products as primers for different reasons. Today I'm going to cover some of the most popular primers and I'm going to tell you the reasons I personally reach for each one and what their purpose is and how they're going to affect your makeup. An eye primer's purpose is to prevent your eyeshadow from creasing, it's also to stop it from moving, and there are different consistencies in primers. This one, for instance, by Anastasia Beverly Hills is relatively opaque. It is a little bit more tacky, but it does dry down and it is a light coloured base, and the reason for this is so that it will make your eyeshadows that much more vibrant. This one tends to be a bit like Marmite, you either love it or you hate it. For me, I feel like this one works better on younger skin because it is slightly thicker in its consistency. And I find that when it dries down, it can kind of enhance fine lines and it really is more suited to a full coverage look. Whereas something like the Urban Decay Eyeshadow Primer Potion, which is an OG of primers, this one is a lot more fluid. It is more suitable for all age groups, all skin types. You can get it in a very subtle tint like this. You can also get it in a couple of colours as well. So this one's less about making the eyeshadow vivid, it's more about setting it in place and stopping it from moving. It's also not about neutralising the eyelid. So it really depends on what you're looking for. So let's go into this palette here. This is by LH Cosmetics. This is a really beautiful rainbow coloured palette with matte eyeshadows, which I thought would be a really good one to show you the subtle differences on the skin alone and also on top of the primer. I'm also going to dip into some colours from this palette by NARS because we have some shimmers which are quite opaque, but you'll see the difference that a light primer underneath will do. So here I've placed 2 stripes of the Anastasia Beverly Hills eye primer on my arm. I'm going in with this matte blue eyeshadow, first on the skin with no primer. As you can see, it's a really nice intense blue and it does need a couple of swipes to really build up the opacity. You do tend to find that with matte eyeshadows, they do need a couple of swipes. So I'm going to go back in again with the same colour, but this time we're going on top of the primer. And as you can see, it instantly grabs the eyeshadow. It is marginally different, but it does make a subtle difference. But the important factor with this is that that eyeshadow on top of that primer is going to last probably 3 times plus longer than the eyeshadow that has no primer underneath. So that's 2 swatches for both eyeshadows. You can continue to drag it down on the primer and it doesn't get ashy or change tone. It still keeps true to its colour and its vibrancy. So I'm going to show you again, this time with a pink colour. Pink tends to lose its vibrancy on the skin because we have blood underneath, so it's not as vibrant, but on a primer you can instantly see not only does it hold that colour really well, but it looks that much more vibrant. I always find when you're applying matte eyeshadows, the application works best when you use a patting motion rather than a swiping motion, but I'm just swiping for swatch purposes. So I'm just going in with a second swatch on both, and it is so much more visible on this shade than the blue that the primer is really working for the eyeshadow. Now, another one of my favourites, which I use on a lot of models but also on myself, you've seen it in many tutorials, is I like to use a white primer. This one is the Whiteout Super Pomade by KVD. I also like to use Pure White by MAC. You might also be familiar with other paint pots by MAC such as Painterly and Soft Ochre. Those are colours that actually match skin tones. So not only are they great at keeping your eyeshadows in place, they also neutralise the colour of your eyelids. The reason I will always reach for a white is when I really want a colour to look identical to the colour that's in the pan, or I want something to look a lot more vibrant. It's more ideal for when you're using bright colours because they really will look super vibrant and won't get lost on the skin. But it is equally as good when you're using everyday colours if you want them to look more true to the colour that's in the pan. But again, this is probably something I would do if it was more of a full coverage look rather than an everyday look. I will get to an everyday primer towards the end, which will be the Urban Decay one. So I'm going to show you how this works in terms of using full coverage eyeshadows over a white. You may think because it's full coverage you don't need the primer, but the reason we use the white underneath is so that the colour translates from the pan onto the skin. Going back in with that exact same shade, this time we are swatching it directly over the white base as our primer. And you can see it almost looks like a different eyeshadow. It's a slightly different tone, but the one that's over the eyeshadow primer almost looks identical to the colour that's in the pan. So sometimes you can also use it just to give you a slight variation in tone. I'm going to show you again, this time with a sort of champagne-y tone. We're going straight onto the skin and it is a beautiful champagne. Don't forget, having the base underneath will make these last a lot longer and prevent them from creasing. Eyeshadows that are shimmery can settle in the crease when they warm up. So it does look beautiful, but let's go back in over the top of the white, and as you can see, we've got a slightly lighter payoff, and again it looks more true to the colour that's in the pan. So I'll just show you how I remove these with some micellar water. This one is by La Roche-Posay, but any micellar will do. It's just to give you an idea of how they come off the arm. The ones with the eyeshadow primer do have that little bit more staying power. You will find that the base of that primer still stays put a lot longer than the eyeshadow that has nothing underneath it. I find I really do need to rub over the ones that have the primer on to remove it. And again, it may appear quite subtle, but it does make all the difference when you're using these on your thin eyelids. So now this is more your everyday primer. This is something you would use if you wear eyeshadow on a daily basis. It's great if you have oily lids or hooded eyelids, so that when your skin touches itself and it warms up the product, that's when you're going to get creasing and movement. I'm also going to put this against the infamous p.louise base, which you will have seen all over social media. It's so full coverage. It's also very, very tacky, but it's one that people keep buying as an everyday primer because it's seen to be used in all kinds of makeup across social media. If you're into those super full coverage makeup looks, this primer works really, really well. It's very effective for that type of makeup, but as an everyday primer, it's just not one that I gravitate towards. I personally prefer the Urban Decay Primer Potion. So I've swatched a matte brown on the primer potion, and I'm now swatching on the skin directly next to it with no primer, and you can clearly see the difference. The skin doesn't naturally grab the eyeshadow the same way that the primer potion does. And I'm going to show you again here. This one is a matte brown. As you can see, it goes on quite chalky. The finish isn't that great, whereas it's a lot more uniformed when it goes over the primer potion. You can see here that I can swipe over it a couple of times without it breaking up and looking chalky, whereas when I did that with the first swatch, you can see it really did start to break up and almost come back off the skin. Because this primer only has a tint to it, it won't change the colour of your eyeshadow. The swatches with the primer underneath might look slightly deeper, but that's because the opacity is slightly more intense because the eyeshadow primer has grabbed that eyeshadow. With the p.louise one, you can't swipe the eyeshadow because it stays tacky. It mixes with your eyeshadow, so now it looks more ashy. So if you do want to try the p.louise one, use a tapping motion, not a swiping motion. Otherwise it won't work for you, it will work against you. But it is good at grabbing that eyeshadow. You can see here, I'm going to swatch this bright orange tone straight onto the skin, which is a really good colour payoff, again from the LH Cosmetics palette. And you can see over the p.louise base, it does grab and it does make it a little bit more vibrant, but again, it is still tacky, so it will enhance your fine lines and wrinkles because it's a thicker consistency. This is not meant in an offensive way at all, however, I do feel like this would be a really good primer for drag makeup. Those are the looks that you really do tap and build lots of layers of colour onto to really build up the vibrancy of eyeshadow around the eyes, and it can be thick because it's drag makeup. I'm just less of a fan for everyday looks. I tend to stay away from using concealers as a primer. They don't tend to have the staying power that a primer has. And one product I didn't feature in this video, which is one of my favourites, which is the NARS Eyeshadow Primer Base, because that really does double well as a concealer. Anyway, if you've got any questions, please pop them into the comment section below and I will get back to you. I hope you found it useful and informative. Please give the tutorial a thumbs up if you did. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next week. Bye!